Welcome to the Inspired Leader, the podcast. I'm your host, Allie Stone. All of my life, I've been passionate about leadership. I've been a senior level leader in the hospitality industry since 2005, growing a chain of franchise restaurants from 1 unit to 12, spanning across northern Alberta. And during that time, I've been on a journey to discover what leadership means to me and how I can utilize it to show up in my career and in my life. What I've found is that the most impactful, the most meaningful experiences that I've witnessed or been a part of as a leader have come when we connect with our hearts. Over the past decade or more, I've honed in on and refined a leadership model that speaks to this. I have developed numerous programs that help leaders deepen their understanding of the impact they can not only have on their careers, but also on the world around them. And now it's my mission to share this model of leadership through a heart-centered focus with the world. I'm the founder of The Inspired Leader, through which I mentor and coach leaders. I facilitate engaging and inspiring workshops that help you think outside of the box and connect with your heart and your emotions. And I also deliver keynote speeches to inspire and motivate teams to engage in their own personal leadership style in a way that's authentic to them. It's my hope that through these podcasts you feel inspired to go out and challenge yourself to try new things as a leader, to show up in the world maybe just a little differently, and hopefully find a deeper connection with who you authentically are. Thank you for being here. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of the Inspired Leader podcast. I'm your host, Allie Stone. And as always, super excited to be here. A little slow on podcasts this summer, but you know what? I think that's okay. Sometimes you get really caught up in this idea that you have to do things and things have to happen in certain ways all the time. And I'm really just enjoying conversations right now with amazing women. And so I have an amazingly beautiful woman with me today. Her name is Kim Jones. Say hi, Kim.
Hi, Ellie. Such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here with me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. We've known each other for a couple of years now, maybe even like 2.5 years at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really excited to sit down and talk to you. We're both coaches in the industry. You support me. And I think this is just like such an important conversation that we can have today, especially two coaches talking about our careers and what we do, because number one, I think coaching in a lot of ways is kind of unknown. Like people often ask me, well, what is coaching really? And what is that all about? And number two, I think it'll be really cool just to shed some light with listeners on what we do and what our careers look like and what our businesses look like. So
let's do it.
I'm super excited to do that.
Me too.
Okay, cool. So I really like to just kind of kick these off by getting you to introduce yourself. So maybe just like share a little bit of your history with the listeners, maybe what brought you to this point in time in front of me today. How does that sound?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit of background on me. So Allie, you know this because you and I went through coach training together back 2-3 years ago. So we started thinking about becoming like career coaches, not coaches of careers, but coaches in our careers around the same time. Mm-hmm. What my trajectory looked like prior to that time was all about corporate. I spent 25 years making my way, climbing the corporate ladder, starting out actually at the lowest rung as a file clerk and an administrative assistant, and eventually working my way up to the C-suite. Mm-hmm. I was divisional CIO, most recently for Farmers Insurance Company, where I was responsible for the technology vision and strategy for the personal lines division of Farmers. And then that did expand over my time there to take on some other functions as well. But inherent in that journey were a lot of twists and turns that I never could have predicted going in. What I was really looking for from my career was really having a job that was challenging and exciting and where I felt like I was making a difference. I used to look at people who were in executive positions in corporations and I thought, you know, I want to be like them. They look like they're making a really big difference in the world and they're doing important things. And so I went that direction. I started my career actually in finance and operations, and eventually worked my way up to the senior levels of leadership when I was in operations, and then eventually transferred over into IT, running technology shops from a business perspective. In all of that movement, I would say what was underlying a lot of where I was at internally was this sense that through each step that I was taking, that it still wasn't hitting the mark for me in terms of delivering on that career that I really felt like was my own, and where I was making the kind of impact that I wanted to make. So I just kept moving. And as I worked my way up higher and higher in organizations, I actually found that my satisfaction levels were decreasing, not increasing, which was a big surprise to me. But by then, you've got a lot of the perks and the reasons to stay, relationships. There's a lot of social capital in having these great jobs that other people admire. So I kept plugging along and hoping that with the next job or the next opportunity, I might find my way to something satisfying. So that takes me about 25 years into my career. And then back about 8 years ago, I started experiencing a series of personal tragedies that made me reassess the priority that I was placing on my work relative to what was important to me outside of work. And also realizing that my life force was really being invested into something that wasn't creating satisfaction and happiness, but was in fact creating a lot of stress and overwhelm, and just sort of a feeling of, is this all there is in my life? So when I started experiencing some of these tragedies in my life, it became apparent that I didn't have the room for both my job and giving these events the attention and the personal investment that I felt they needed. So it was because of that I finally decided to leave. And it's not that I hadn't thought of leaving before, but I didn't know what I was going to do next. So I kept waiting to figure out what that looked like before I would make a jump. And then it finally occurred to me that I was just going to have to make the jump, that I probably wasn't going to learn what I needed to know about my next step until I, took the space and the time to really figure that out. So 5 years ago, I resigned unexpectedly. I wasn't planning on it, but it was in a conversation with my boss. And in one moment, it became incredibly clear to me that I need to move on. And I approached the conversation with him. We worked out an exit plan, and I was gone in about a month and a half after that, with no plans of what to do next. And to be honest, I needed a break. So there was a part of me that just needed to decompress and reflect and deal with what was happening in my personal life. I also made the decision to go back and get a degree in cultural anthropology so that I could, justify the time that I wasn't looking for work. Fast forward, after I got that degree, I decided that I wanted to coach the kinds of women that I myself had been, women who have invested significantly in career paths and in professional lives that don't feel like it's enough for them, or like they're getting the impact that they want out of work, and also have no idea how to actually make their kind of desired career a reality, or what that even looks like. So I now work a lot with women who are grappling with these big questions and don't know where to turn. And having gone through my own process, I enjoy guiding them and helping them figure that out. And then I also do a lot of work in companies. I do executive coaching in companies, speaking events, workshops, and going back to my anthropology degree, I've really emphasized the work that I do in companies around gender equity advising, because I'm very passionate about the advancement of women in the workplace and women bringing their authentic selves to work so that we can really benefit from the gifts and the talents that they have.
Yeah, this is such important work that you're talking about. I'm going to jump back a little bit because I had a few questions along the way that I think would be cool to explore. So you were talking about how you weren't you used the word life force. Like that wasn't, you weren't getting what you needed out of this position. What does that look like for you? I'm just curious because I ask my clients sometimes and I get different answers. Like, what does it mean to be like connected to this feeling of life? Like, what is that? And what is that for you, Kim? Like, what were you missing in that time? What were the indicators?
Yeah, I think what was really missing for me was that I felt so passionately about a lot of things in the world that matter to me. I mentioned gender equity. A lot of what's really important to me is the representation of people in work and in society who have not had equal access to the systems of success that those in dominant groups have had. It's why I went back and studied cultural anthropology, because this is something that I'm very passionate about. I felt like the work that I was doing was serving something very different than what was so important to me. And when I say that there was, not the life force, the where I was putting my energy at work was, yes, in solving a lot of big problems, in leading teams and setting vision and strategy and really advancing the agenda of the organizations that I've worked for. But what it also involved was a lot of internal struggle and external struggle to get there. So I was dealing with my own experiences with gender bias, especially as a woman in technology who didn't come up through the technology ranks. So a lot of people questioned whether I was competent to do the job that I was doing, which made it much more difficult for me to have the quick impact that others who don't have those obstacles could have. So that's an example of an internal struggle. There were also lots of politics in the jobs that I had, with changing leadership and priorities and budgets and projects being funded and cut and all of those things. That took a tremendous amount of energy in managing all of that. And I felt like that was not energy that was serving in the way that I wanted to serve. Now, I work very hard in the business that I have. I love it. And I feel like the effort that I'm putting in, the work that I'm putting in, is serving something that I feel is having the impact in the world that I want to see. My mission for my company is to really, that society actually will be a better place when more women are doing work that they love, that more women stop doing work that they can barely tolerate, and that they're actually understanding and bringing their gifts into the world. Well, if we look all around, we've got a number of intractable problems that we're facing in our societies, in our communities. And I believe that having more balance in positions of power where there are different perspectives and that it's not so singular will help to bring the different experiences and thinking that we need to solve some of those problems. So to me, I see women's advancement as being much more about each individual person living a fulfilling life, but really more as a part of a bigger issue we have, which is that, sort of a singular focus in how we approach a lot of our problems is not solving them.
I totally agree. And as you're saying all of that, I'm having these kind of like memories or thinking of even myself at times, or different women I've worked with who stay because they feel like they have to, right?
Yeah.
There's like this societal pressure, peer pressure to stay in these roles. Like, you should be grateful, you got this. And this role you're talking about, working with farmers and stuff, I mean, people probably dream about this, right? And then you find yourself in this place where you're like, oh my gosh, it's not what I thought it was going to be. It's not aligning with who I am as a person. And having the courage to like acknowledge that and step out of that and step into something new is just so inspiring to other women. So I want to say that on the podcast, because I think that's a really important thing. Like, you're talking about how you want to work with all these other women, but you've done it, right? And I think the best mentors that we can work with are the experienced mentors, the ones that know it, have been there, have been, have the war stories for you and can help you with that. Because I think I think that's how we share with each other and how we connect on like really deep levels, because we know we've been there together. And I think that's how we connect too, for
Yeah.
sure, even though we come from
Yeah.
different industries, right?
Absolutely, 100% agree with everything that you just said. And touching on the point of the experience and having walked the path, that was something that was really missing for me when I was on my own career journey, because like you mentioned, all I heard were the voices in my ear that were saying that, you know, kind of implying that I had lost my mind for walking away from something that was sort of our definition of what a good life is supposed to look like. And it really is gratifying when working with people who are getting those same voices in their ear to provide a completely different perspective on what a journey to meaningful work could look like for them, and how they can have even a bigger impact. But they've got to work against all of that conditioning that, like you said, tells us that these are the paths we should be on. And if we deviate from them, that is something that we should internally fix, as opposed to looking externally and saying, well, maybe it's what I'm doing and not that there's something wrong, that I can't feel happy in this role that's supposed to be making me happy. And what I think I learned through my process of making this transition is just how many people feel this way. But because a lot of people, I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people feel like they're the only ones who are struggling with these questions, and they need to figure out how to fix it and make it work. It's not really talked about enough for people to know that, you know, this is actually quite common, and doing something about it and aligning with something that's really meaningful for you is the best gift that you can give yourself in this life, I believe.
And the world.
Yeah.
Right? Like we weren't
100%.
put here to not live in our true nature, right? And so if you're living against that your whole life, you're just fighting against something that naturally somewhere you naturally want to be, even if you're not quite sure what that is.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Yeah.
and I know you're about that as well. I know that that's the work that you do as well, is to continue to look at who you are and what you can bring as offering your gifts to the world, and thereby benefiting the world through that work. And I just see the impact that people who bring that forward have in ways that we need, again, as communities and as societies.
Agreed. So I have kind of a deep question for you. Wasn't on the list,
Shoot.
but it came up as you were talking. And so I just want your opinion on it. I want to see what you think, and we'll have a little talk about it. But we're talking about these societal pressures, right? To conform, to stay in the job, the good job that you have that society thinks is great. In my mind, I was like, yeah, there's these societal pressures, but there's also this internal ticker tape, which in my mind, at least in my own personal experience, is actually stronger than the societal pressures. Somehow at some point in my life, at least specifically, it became stronger than the societal pressure, and I had to work through that. How do you help women with that when they're struggling with that kind of ticker tape in their own mind?
Well, this is where I'm going to come at it a little bit from my cultural anthropologist background. So if we look at what culture does, and I study culture, what culture does is it actually creates the norms and the rules around which a society can function effectively according to whatever the goals of that society are. So we live in societies that are very much based on a capitalist system and economic prosperity. And so the way culture works is we have been conditioned to buy into the values and the beliefs of those cultures. And what that ends up looking like is we begin to internalize them as our own beliefs. So where this conditioning becomes effective, to where, you know, people are basically working in the cultural system in ways that support the society, but may not always benefit themselves. So as an example, doing work that is important for our communities and our society, but don't necessarily serve who we want to be or what we want to do in the world. What allows that to work is when the beliefs and the values that we've been conditioned into start to feel like our own voice. So when you hear in your mind, you should be grateful for this job, like everybody will, else would, thinks this is exactly what you should be doing. And I feel guilty if I go off and do my own thing. All of those statements start to sound like you. And that's what makes them so powerful, is that it's Allie, it's Kim, it's saying that, but really what it actually, where it actually originates from, it's much more related to, again, what the water that we're swimming in. And that's almost, I think, what I do in the work that I do, is that, is exposing that water and saying, you know what, there's other ways. And in order to move in the direction of those other options, you have to understand and be aware of where a lot of these beliefs that you hold now as your own have come from, and start to challenge if they're actually true. So is it true that I'm selfish if I go off and do work that I love? Or is it true that by doing that, I'm actually serving in some greater way, and possibly serving as an inspiration to those in who are watching me? So it's really bringing a broader perspective that starts to really look at these beliefs for what they are, and bring in new ways of thinking about things, so that we can start to understand that these beliefs aren't serving us, and they're not really serving much of anything really, other than, again, this broader system that we're all part of.
I think that's such an important thing that you're saying, because our realities are created from what we believe, right? And you and I have done work together on limiting beliefs, and I think it's really, really powerful stuff. When you sit down and you really ask yourself, like, it's so funny, and you can probably think of this too, but like, if you have this belief, for example, I don't know, first thing comes to mind, I'm not worthy. You have this belief, I'm not worthy. And that is your belief. You rarely think to challenge it until you find somebody to help you kind of, I always say, for me, coaching is helping you see around your corner. It's like the edge of your consciousness, right? We all have edges to which we can see, and we can stretch those edges, but we need help to do that, right? And so this, like, almost unawareness, would that be the right way to describe it? It's like unaware that that's a thought you're even having that doesn't serve you. And so when you can start to become aware, I feel like everything shifts, and there's just such powerful transformations that happen in coaching when you're willing to sit down and look at these beliefs that may or may not serve you. One question I've had a couple times, and I know how I would answer it, so we'll talk a little bit about it, but I think this is a really interesting question, and we've never talked about it before. I'm way off script, so I hope that's
I love it.
But a question I've had a couple times is like, will coaching change what I believe? And it's a really interesting question, because what you can tell when somebody's asking that question, they're nervous, right? And they're nervous about what might happen. But what do you think? Like, if somebody asked you that question, if one of your clients asked you that question, is coaching going to change what I believe? Is it going to change who I am? What would you say? How would you handle
it's such a good question. And I'm like, I have a million things that are running through my head as to why I think that's such a good question, because there's something about holding a belief really strongly that can create a lot of amazing things. Like, I believe in some cause that's really beneficial, or it is also, and I should say, it is also behind a lot of the struggles and the challenges that we have personally, as well as how we relate to each other. So often when there's conflict, whether it's internal or external, it can be traced back to a belief. And something is happening that is contrary to that belief, that's creating some kind of friction in some way. So as an example, if I believe that I am unworthy, and I start to by holding on to that belief, anything that suggests that I might be worthy starts to create friction in me. But if I don't hold that belief, at all, and I'm maybe open to, well, what am I? Am I worthy? Am I unworthy? No, I just simply am. I am here, and I'm, you know, I've got some things that I want to accomplish in my life, and worthy or unworthy almost feels like it's a question that doesn't even apply if you're not holding on to a belief so tightly. And then, of course, we can look at externally where we have so many divided communities right now where people aren't even really able to talk to each other. A lot of that stems from a belief held really strongly. So that's sort of my thought on belief. So if someone were to say to me, like, am I going to change what I believe? I would probably answer from my own perspective that some of the best things that have happened in my own life is when I have changed what I believe. And so being open to that in terms of what it would mean for you to shift a belief is something we would explore in coaching. And if it's a belief that you are holding on to really tightly, I would probably want to explore what that belief means to you. How is it serving your identity? How is it serving your sense of who you are in the world? Mm-hmm. And in those conversations, so many insights can be had, even if the belief doesn't shift at all.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's like the edges of the consciousness, right? So
yeah, I would love to hear, Ali, what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's what I would say too, right? Like I cannot change your beliefs. You would only change your beliefs, and that's up to you. All I will do is ask you powerful questions that will help you see around the potential blind spots you might have in your life. And when we talk about it, you can decide if that belief serves you or not. That's not my call. All I'm here to do is help be a thinking partner for you, right? And I always say, a lot of thought leaders say this now, but I actually think it's really powerful. It's like, what got you here is not going to get you to where you want to go. And it's maybe becoming a little bit oversaid, but I think it's pretty powerful when you think about it, right? And it's true.
Right.
Every time we level up in our lives, and you and I in new careers, and we have what we did to get done what we got done before is not going to get us to where we want to go now, right? And you have to get outside of your comfort zone to experience those things in life. I think that's so important. So
yeah, I think that's exactly right. I love that.
Yeah, that's super cool. So in your experiences, obviously you've had a lot of challenging moments by the sounds of it coming up in corporate America. And I should point out that you're American, so you live in California and I live in Canada. So we live in a little bit different climates and we have different circumstances. But a lot of similarities at the same time, for sure. And I think we can both definitely agree on the gender equity thing. I mean, to this day, women are still paid, 80 cents on the dollar, right, of men. And that's just reality. And I think sometimes even male leaders do that unknowingly because it's so ingrained. And so that is really, really challenging. And so I want to bring it back to you working with these women again. So when you're working with these women and they're facing these issues, these are really hard issues. How are you helping them through these things? How are you helping them see that there's possibility for them to grow and step into who they are, even when they're facing these like external elements that are holding them back?
It's such a great and important question. Couple things that come to mind. The first is that, like the boss that you referenced that has no awareness that there's this bias, I often find that that's the case with many of my clients. A lot of people still haven't been fully educated or made aware of the impact that biases, whether it's gender or something else, what those biases impact by way of, in this case, our career trajectories. So there are a lot of biases that work against women in the workplace. And example includes that women are not seen as competent as men in leadership roles. And there's an expectation that women have to prove themselves by demonstrating experience before they'll get a promotion. Whereas men who are aligned with a leadership stereotype are much more likely to be promoted based on their potential. And so what you end up having over the course of an entire career evolution for a man and a woman is that a woman is going to have to work harder and gain more experience in order to be given the same opportunities as men. So that's just data and research that we know this is how this plays out. But if you look at an individual woman's perspective, she's seeing around her that people are getting promoted where she may have more experience or where she may be more competent, and feel like that's there's something personally going on there. So she may internalize that to think like there's something off with what I'm doing. I don't know it or understand exactly why I'm not getting ahead when I do all these other things. And it tends to feed into our own, the beliefs that we adopt, which is we're not as capable, we're not as competent. And we hold those as much as the general society because that's what we've been taught. And so in those cases, she may go her entire career wondering why she's not getting ahead at the same rate. And that starts to impact her confidence. Another bias is that women are judged much more harshly for their mistakes because, again, they're not seen as being as competent. Whereas if male counterpart would make a similar mistake, it would be attributed to a bad day. Whereas for a woman, it would be attributed to the fact that she's not as competent as she needs to be. And again, over time, that can start to foster things like perfectionism. I have to be perfect for me to get ahead. It can foster imposter syndrome. It can foster a lack of confidence. So the first thing that I do with my clients is I create the awareness around the broader social and cultural dynamics that create these imbalances. And the good news is there are lots and lots of strategies, some people like, some people don't like, about how to manage around these biases. So it takes almost it takes more intention, it takes more forethought and strategy for people who have biases that work not in their favor to navigate in those environments, but it can be successfully done. And that's what I work with my women clients on, is how they can start to decide what strategies they want to deploy in order to deal with the things that almost all women deal with in their their day-to-day work.
What would you say, this is really interesting. We've never really talked about this, that there's strategy around this. What would you say the average stay versus leave rate once a woman like really understands these biases, really understands what she's facing, understands what the strategy might be that she has to employ if she wants to like work this out in this career? How often do they leave? Do they turn around and say, this isn't for me, like this is a lot of work and maybe I should go somewhere else and find somebody who's willing to work more openly and didn't have the gender bias? Or do you find like women are really willing to put their head down and work through it?
I find both, for sure. So the stats are pretty grim on this. In technology, which is the field that I most recently came from, by midpoint of their careers, half of women have left the field because of the very harsh biases that are actually amplified in technology versus other fields that have better gender representation. So in technology, you have still about 25 to 35% of positions, depending on the company and type of role, being held by women. So they are highly underrepresented. So you see a lot of attrition. I think there's two things going on. People are now aware that these biases exist, but they may not fully understand what those biases are and how they're impacting them. Okay. And so therefore they may not know there are things that they can do to navigate those challenges. So let me just give you an example so you know what I'm referencing. So there's this double bind that most people have probably heard about by now, which is that there is a set of characteristics that are desired for leaders, and those characteristics align very well with the characteristics that go into being what they call a good man, meaning by that it's not you're a good person, it's more of you fit the stereotype of what people consider to be a good man. However, those same leadership characteristics do not align with what it means to be a good woman. So, for example, being, ambitious, being all of those things align with both good leader, good man. They only, with women, they actually contradict what it means to be quote unquote a good woman. A good woman is nice, is accommodating, is deferential, is not, rocking the boat, is likable. Okay, so we know that. So the more a woman acts like a leader, the more she's less likely, the less liked she is, which then affects how the company perceives her. And if you're not liked well, then you're less likely to do well and have the good relationships. If you act like a good woman, then you don't have what people consider to be the chops to do leadership. And so you're well liked, but you're not getting ahead. So one of the ways that you can get around this as a woman is you can do things like smile a lot more. You can, instead of saying, here's what I think, you can ask a question. So you can get your same point across. So rather than, I don't agree with that strategy, you can say instead, have you thought about this instead? You can set context. So if I go in and say, in a situation where I don't agree with something, you know what, the company really values as one of its core values being direct. And so from the spirit of that, I thought I would share with you some thoughts that I have. So if you put it in line of like, I'm not doing this because I'm, a direct woman who's unlikable. I am doing this because I'm a good company steward who's abiding by the values of the organization. So when I talk about this with my clients, a lot of them will say to me, that's not fair. I shouldn't have to do all those things. And that doesn't feel authentic. And my response to that is absolutely, I 100% agree with you. I think it's pretty outrageous that we have to do some of these things. But if you want to get ahead in the job, these things will help you because they're shown in studies to kind of navigate around this double bind that I mentioned earlier. And then to your point, a lot of women will say at that point, like, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go start my own business, or I'm going to go find a company that's going to be more inclusive and more aware of these factors so that I don't have to, be so strategic in how I'm navigating my career. But what I love about having those conversations is it really gives people a set of options that they can work from, and they can decide what is best for them.
Yeah, totally. I think that's really important too, right? And we've kind of already hit on this with the coaching, but being able to decide what's best for you is super important. The thing that was coming up for me as I brought that up is like, once you become aware, you can't really become unaware.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of have to make a decision based on your values at that point. You have to decide one way or another. Once you know what needs to happen, once you understand, it's either you're in or you're out, right? And those are pretty crucial moments in our lives when they come up for us. And I think they're really important and shouldn't be overlooked. There's a lot to unpack in those moments for people when they come up. So I think that that's really important. And we never really talked about the strategy before. So I think that's cool that you like shared some tips like that. I think I can see how those work, and I can see how I've used them without even really knowing that those are the strategies. But asking a question rather than presenting a statement is so much more powerful. At least I find for me, I don't know if men feel the same way, but for me, when I'm working with somebody, a question just goes so much further.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is really helpful from that perspective. And it works for women more than, being more direct.
Yeah.
And it's nice for our wonderful male counterparts that they don't have to worry about this stuff like we do. But the good news is that there are things that we can do to be effective. I find that a lot of women actually do want to navigate in these environments because they feel strongly that they can start to be also the change that the company needs. So the more education they are able to give, and the more women we have in organizations, and men, there's lots of men who understand this, who invest in this, who are allies, who support equal representation for everyone, and they're doing their part as well. And the more of that we get on the inside of these companies, the more likely it is that we can start to have more inclusive cultures as a norm rather than an exception.
Absolutely. So that probably brings me to a question that I wrote down. I'll ask you one question I wrote down.
Okay. I love it.
You're just coming on the ride with me, right?
Absolutely.
What do you think it is that women most need to bring to the workforce these days to show up and to contribute in authentic and genuine ways and make and create more inclusive workplaces?
I love this question because this, in my opinion, is the time in history where the natural qualities associated with feminine energy and women is being recognized as what's needed in our modern workplaces and elsewhere. So things like empathy, things like collaboration, things like listening and focusing on problem solving. So you have a lot of the balance of the traditionally masculine types of traits that we tend to lionize in companies, things like competition, quick decision making, risk taking, being very quick, hustling. Like all of that has contributed to work environments where a lot of workers are starting to vote with their feet and quit because they want to be in more humane environments. So they don't want to have to feel like, all they're doing is hustling and competing and grinding and competing. And I mentioned that one. So all of those things that have been in place have led to a lot of churn as a result of the pandemic and people really assessing the value and meaning that work has in their lives. What women bring to the table is a much different, but again, we're talking about, generalities here. So this obviously doesn't apply across the board to everybody, but certainly the traits that are now being looked at by these companies where managers are being encouraged to empower their staff to listen and have empathy, to really work with people who have different experiences and bringing those experiences and perspectives to the table. Those are all things that I think women generally are socialized and do very well, and can serve as a great balance. So we achieve a little bit of a counterbalance to the over-indexing that we've had on these sort of more traditional masculine traits that we've tended to run our companies according to.
Yeah. Yes. And so that brings me to the leading from the heart, because I think this is so important right now. So what does it mean to you, Kim, to lead from the heart, coming from, corporate America and into a place where now you run your own business and you get to interact with leaders in such a different way? What has this come to mean for you?
It really this is one I got this one on your list, and so I was thinking a lot about what it means to me. And I think what I would say now is that I'm able to bring a perspective that I feel is, like you said, it kind of pushes the edges for some people. It's like kind of on the edge of a lot of things that people believe and so forth. And what it means to lead from the heart is to be true in that message, but do it in a way that's inclusive and it invites in all kinds of different perspectives and experiences, and really doesn't leave anybody behind because of what they have grown to understand, believe, and know. In my mind, the only way to solve this is solve things like gender equity is first to acknowledge that we have issues here and to be aware of the systems that have created those inequities, and then to be able to work with all kinds of different perspectives on that in ways where we can have a dialogue and a conversation. And so for me, leading from the heart is really bringing who we authentically and truly are forward in a way that invites and doesn't divide.
I love that. And I think that's so important. I've been thinking a lot about, I did one of my other podcasts with the hospitality podcast, and this woman at the end, I was talking to her just about a story that had touched her heart. And she said to me, we need to hold hands. And I was like, yes, we
Mhm.
need to hold hands. We need to stop pushing each other away. We need to start connecting. We need to start unifying and finding ways to remind ourselves each day that this is important right now. I mean, coming out, you already mentioned the pandemic a little bit, but coming out of a pandemic, coming out of all of this disconnection, and then all of the other issues that we already had before it, we've just layered this extra piece on top of it all that's just not helping things if we don't get intentional about what we're doing right now every day. And it's so important. As I'm talking to you, I can see in my window over here, I can see my pride flag. So I always keep my pride flag in my office and I keep it close. And it's an important reminder for me of diversity and inclusion, but on all levels. It's not just about pride, but it's a symbol for me. And I always keep it in my office. And it's always something I think about because I think the more we become aware of those things, the more we start to live it and breathe it and move into it and just come from that space without even really thinking about it in the end, right? And then that's when things just
Yes.
become so beautiful.
Amen. Absolutely. Yes. Yes to all of that.
Yeah,
Yes to
I
all of
love
that.
it. I love it. I love what you said there. I keep thinking, I'm like, I should do a podcast on holding hands. People be like, she's crazy. No, it's so important.
I agree. It's really interesting to hear the perspective of people who don't really want to associate with people whose beliefs feel like violations of their rights. And I totally understand that perspective. Like I can't argue with it. I don't disagree with it. Um, on my side, what I tend to be about is where can we find common ground and then use that to have a conversation that starts to shift, because in my mind the the polarization and the the disconnection that we have from people who don't believe in ways that we feel is important to our own safety and to who we are in the world, that is actually in my mind exacerbating the situation, whereas the conversations where you can start to find areas of common ground and then use that as the basis of starting to have a shift, to me feels like a bigger impact than
Yeah,
the disconnection.
agreed. I often talk about the swing of the pendulum. I don't know if I've ever talked to you about this, but I'm always talking about when we make a change in our life, we'll swing that pendulum one way and we tend to swing it really far because we're human and that's what we do. We overcorrect. And this happens with these issues too. And sometimes we have people on the far right of the pendulum or the far left and they don't swing back and find that balance. And sometimes that can be really hard because it gets us confused about the issues and has us in a hard place where it feels hard to find that common ground, hard to find that equality, that unity. But I think it's important to remember that that's not everybody if you're facing that. And you just need to keep searching for like your community of people that you can connect with in all different places that you can start to have these conversations with too. So I'm just kind of having that thought in the back of my head that some people listening might be like, yeah, but there's some really extreme things that are happening out there, some really extreme groups, some really extreme people. And yes, there are. But there are also many, many people who are willing to sit at the table and have a very open conversation. And I think that that's really what's really important to remember. And I think the extreme seems big when we think about it, but it's probably not as big as we actually think it is if we actually sat down and held hands.
Yes,
We'll just say
I have lived that so many times where I used to think like I'll never have anything in common with a Trump supporter, as an example, here in the US.
yeah.
And I actually have lots of friends and people that I talk to all the time who are Trump supporters. And that's just one example. I have
Mhm.
many other like them, but where I can sit down with them and just ask them questions like, tell me what is it about this way of thinking politically, what appeals to you about it. And in that, I can start to understand things like, this person has as many fears as I do, but they happen to be different fears. And so where, they might fear something like loss of freedom and free speech, I may fear loss of fair treatment of people and civil rights, things like that. But you start to see those areas of common ground. And in that understanding, I think there's a lot more opportunity for solutions
Yeah.
than in, again, not having the conversations at all.
Agreed. That happened to me about, I don't know, 10 years ago in my life. I started doing business with a company in Texas, just as an aside. And I got really close with this woman that owned the company. We were doing this business and whatever, it was through the restaurants. And one day I said to her, she was talking about shooting. She was talking about going out and shooting on the weekend. I was like, okay, I need to understand because this isn't a thing, right? And we had this amazing conversation, and she enlightened me into like what her family culture was, how she had grown up, and I felt so differently about it by the time I got off the phone. And I think that that's so important that we're open to those conversations for sure. I mean, I don't want to carry a gun, but that's fine, right? Like that's my choice, right? So it's all good, right? But we can still talk to these people, and we can all come together and share our beliefs and our views of the world, for sure.
That's my hope, for sure. Yeah.
It would be such a more beautiful place if we could do that. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
I want to ask you one last question. I'm taking lots of time. I only wanted to take an hour, but we've been having a good conversation. So I want to ask you one more question. And then I'll let you on your way today. But I'm wondering for you, what has been a defining moment for you in your career? I just love this question. I think it's a cool question, and it gives some insight into your experiences that you've had. So what's something that's happened for you that's kind of been like, oh, that's really changed who I am and how I show up and brought me to where I am today?
Okay, so this is not going to be probably the answer that you were expecting, but the thing that popped into my head was one of the personal tragedies that I mentioned that I endured, which was when my brother died 8 years ago suddenly of a heart attack. And it was a defining moment in my career, because in that moment where my brother did not get to live a full life, he got to 45. And in that moment, I saw very clearly the choices that I had been making that all of a sudden, it was like the scales fell off my eyes, and I could clearly see how I had been managing my life in ways that were so contrary to what I actually wanted to accomplish during my time in this life. And so my brother, who I love dearly, was my greatest teacher when he was here, and continues to be my greatest teacher now that he's no longer physically in this space with me.
Yeah, but always in your heart, right?
Always in my heart, every single day. Yeah.
Aw. Well, we'll dedicate this episode to your brother then.
To Sean.
Yeah, to Sean. I love that. I think that's so important. And I think we have these moments in our lives, and I think it's important that that was the example that came up, because I'm all about integration and not balance. And I really believe that every part of our life touches the other and in some way affects another part of it. And when we try to push that off, pretend like that doesn't happen, we find ourselves in places that we're really not where we want to be, right? And then one day we wake up and we're 95 and we're like, what the hell happened to our lives? What did we do? Right.
Yes.
And so nobody wants that.
Nobody wants that. And I'm sad to say that it took a tragedy for me to see what I always knew.
Yeah. And it's so hard to lose the people we love. It's so hard.
I know you know that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you got my brain over here. Anyhow, okay, so let's wrap it up. I think this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you, first of all. I'm always so incredibly grateful for you. I think you're amazing. I'm so grateful you're in my life. I'm so grateful to have conversations with you every week. I just feel so blessed. So I hope you know that.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Seriously, Allie, I feel like coming from you, that means so much, because I feel exactly the same way about you.
Thanks, Kim. So as we wrap it up, are there some final words you'd like to leave with the listeners today? Maybe some thoughts on, I don't know, career, life, our conversation today?
I would like to wrap it up with what you just said, which is don't wait until you're 95 to do what is going to make you feel fulfilled and happy in this life.
I love it. I love it. That's beautiful. And if listeners want to connect with you, where can they find you?
They can find me on my website, which is kimjonesalliance.com. And my main social media is LinkedIn, and I'm Kimberly S. Jones, and that's KIMBERLEES Jones.
Nice. Awesome. Okay, well, great. This has been a pleasure today. Thank you so much.
Oh, this was so fun. Thanks so much for having me, Allie. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much for listening. It's been an honor sharing this podcast with you. If you like it, share it with a friend. We're always made stronger by supporting one another. And if you'd like to learn more about The Inspired Leader, you can find me at theinspiredleader.com, The Inspired Leader on Facebook, Instagram, AllieStone __, ALLY, and LinkedIn at Allie Stone. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to connect.